As somebody who's in his 50s, this summer isn't the normal I would have been used to when I was growing up. I'm afraid it is going to be the new normal, and that poses quite big threats. Not a country that's accustomed or been built to cope with extreme heat.
In this interview, I sit down with Ed Miliband, the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, to unpack the latest state of the UK climate report. We discuss the urgency of the recent findings and what this means for our lives right now in the UK as well as in the future. We also delve into the UK's climate resilience plans and explore whether it's sufficient given the immediacy and urgency highlighted in this report. Ed also shares his perspective on where government is falling short, how we should remain hopeful, and the role communities and citizen science could play in informing policy. This is an honest conversation about the UK's climate reality and the road ahead. It's fair to say that the State of UK Climate Report is quite alarming, and the urgency highlighted by this report shows how much the climate has already changed here in the UK. This isn't a distant future problem, it's right here, it's right now. How does this make you feel personally?
It makes me feel worried, and I'm sure it makes your viewers feel worried as well when you read it, and reading it really confirms what we see with our own eyes, doesn't it? As somebody who's in his 50s, this summer isn't the normal I would have been used to when I was growing up. I'm afraid it is going to be the new normal, and that poses quite big threats. But I also feel a sense of hope that we can do something about it. I don't want people to despair. I don't want people to think, well, there's nothing that can be done, because we can act. So I think it's alarming, but we should also realise that we can act.
You talk about threats. What sort of threats and challenges do you foresee based on this report?
I think it's going to really change our British way of life in quite profound ways. We're not a country that's accustomed or been built to cope with extreme heat. Whether that's in schools or in workplaces or even at night in your own home or even during the day in your own home. If you think about sort of flooding, I've seen big flooding in my constituency in Doncaster, 2 once-in-a-100-year events within about 10 years of each other, which shows how the models just can't cope with what is going on. So we're going to have to adapt, but at the same time we can't just adapt, because if we'll be kind of, running up the down escalator, as they say, if we just keep trying to adapt, but we don't tackle the problem. We just won't be able to keep up. So we've got to adapt, but we also got to act.
And what do you think that means for how we live and how we have to adapt in the future? What does that look like?
Look, I think we're still at the beginnings, frankly, of recognising comprehensively what it means. Obviously, it means things like flood defences. It means, and we're consulting on this, that when people get heat pumps, they can also get air-to-air, so-called air-to-air heat pumps, which means they can be sort of air conditioning. That's not something we've ever thought is necessary in this country. I think it's thinking about how you protect people at the workplace, because there'll be, unfortunately, it's not a sort of level playing field in terms of the threat. Some people who work in offices that are air conditioned and so on will be okay, but there'll be people who work outside, work in extreme heat, who are really much more, face much more difficult circumstances, or in factories that are really, going to heat up. So looking at all of those issues. So look, I think we're going to, and this is something the government is doing, but we need to do more of, is like taking a comprehensive look at all of the ways in which we need to adapt to this new normal.
And how can you be confident that today's actions and the roster of plans that you've announced are going to be sufficient to protect future generations from the worst impacts of climate breakdown?
Look, I'm always wanting to do more. Every day I wake up and I think, how can we do more? How can we go further and faster? We're doing a lot to drive forward with things like offshore wind, solar, heat pump rollout, all of the things that we know are necessary. But I do want to say to your viewers, I spend a lot of my time thinking, how can we do more? How can we do more here? And how can we also persuade other countries to do more? The other reason for hope, by the way, is that when we've acted here, we're only 1% of global emissions. Other countries have followed. So we passed the Climate Change Act in 2008. 60 countries are now covered by a similar act. Theresa May passed net zero into law in 2019. 80% of the world, even without the US, is now covered by net zero. So, it's not hopeless. I think your viewers might be like looking at this and thinking, oh, gold, there's just nothing we can do. It isn't hopeless. We're way behind where we need to be, but it isn't hopeless.
One thing they would say is that the granting of oil and gas licences in the North Sea has been seen by many as undermining efforts to reduce emissions, and that's feedback that my audience would very much agree with. In the context of the climate crisis outlined in this report, how can this decision be reconciled with the need to meet our climate targets and ensure a sustainable future for both our children and our grandchildren?
Well, we said in our manifesto that we wouldn't issue new licences in the North Sea to explore new fields, and we're going to stick to that commitment. It's really important. This is about the science, and I'm going to be talking this week about the science and what it's telling us about the nature of the crisis, but I think it's a really good point that we've also got to follow the science when it comes to what it's telling us about the use of fossil fuels.
Great, thank you. Given the systemic nature of the climate crisis, how is the government ensuring coordinated action across departments like DEFRA and NGOs like Planet Patrol to create an integrated, comprehensive and coordinated approach?
Well, first of all, we love Planet Patrol. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Good plug for Planet Patrol. Look, I think there's more we need to do, because I think what Planet Patrol shows and what so many people tell me is we want to be part of this. We want to do stuff in their own communities, in their own home. Now, we've got to make it worth people's while, whether it's buying an electric car or getting a heat pump. It's got to make financial sense for people, but also we've got to give better guidance, and we're working on this. We've got to give better guidance to people, information, not instruction, but information about how they can be part of it. And so that's a work in progress, but we'd love to work with Planet Patrol and your viewers on that.
Can we get you on a paddleboard?
Maybe one day you can get me on a paddle. If the evil handlers will allow it, maybe I'll be allowed on a paddleboard.
Right.
Although I'll definitely fall off, I want to say.
Even better.
Even better.
And that leads into my next question. How is the government supporting grassroots efforts and local organisations like Planet Patrol? Is it work in progress, or are there definitive things that you're doing at the moment?
Look, I think it's work in progress, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on how we work with organisations. One thing we want to do a lot more of in this country, which they do a lot of in Germany, Denmark and so on, is community energy. Because I think, people, it's good that there are companies that want to invest in offshore wind and solar and all of that, but it's also good for people to feel that they own it, that they're part of it, their community, not just as one of my fellow MPs says, not just community benefit, but community stakes. Community stakes in these things, and it's really striking. It's a massive deal in like places that I've mentioned abroad, but not in our country, and we want to drive that forward. I'd say most of all is, I think lots of us can worry in our own lives and think to ourselves, I'm really worried about the climate crisis. Does government share my concern, or are their eyes off the ball? Are they just are their minds elsewhere? And I just really want to reassure your viewers, keep putting pressure on us, because it's important you do that. That's one of the ways we can work together, you holding me to account. But, we really do get it. And one of the reasons I'm doing this on Monday, I'm going to be setting out the state of the climate and nature crisis, because I think we've got a responsibility to tell the truth. I think actually that's what people want from us. They want to say, well, even if it's bad, tell us the truth about what the situation is, and then tell us how you're going to act to tackle it. But don't hide the truth from us, because then we're going to be really suspicious of you, and you'd be right to be suspicious. So this is partly an exercise in levelling with people about the scale of the crisis, but also not false optimism, but real hope about what we can do together to tackle it.
And what is the single most important next steps government can take right now to ensure a sustainable and resilient future?
Drive forward with plans to make Britain a clean energy superpower. We have these abundant resources, the sun, the wind, the waves, all of those things. Let's use them.
Thank you, Ed, so much for your time.
Let's use them.
If you found this interview interesting, then don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more discussions on climate action and policy.